Sam, it is episode 20, if you can believe it. We've already hit 20. That's crazy, huh?
We're almost drinking age. We're close.
One more, and we'll be able to have a beer live on the podcast.
Live on HOU.SEC.CON.
So I'm excited for today. Dr. Branden Williams is going to be joining us. He talked at HOU.SEC.CON about bots on 2023. I think he's coming back in 2024. So it's going to be good.
Yeah, it was a good presentation, good storytelling, which usually makes for a really engaging presentation. So
yeah, he's got a cool character on there, the whole thing. So if you did miss his talk at HOU.SEC.CON wasn't there, please, we'll have a link in this. Go watch it. But yeah, let's get to it, man. Let's talk to Branden.
Let's go.
Sam, how you doing, man?
I am doing excellent. Happy Friday on this recording day. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Just ready to get into the weekend and maybe have a weekend where we have power and that kind of stuff.
That's a luxury. Come on now.
In Texas, I think it is. This grid like falls over at just boom, crashes. Somebody's going to jump on me for saying that, especially you, Sam, because you run that Facebook.
As long as it's not cyber, I'm okay with it. So we're all good.
Well, joining us is Branden Williams. Branden is an old friend, known him for a long time, cybersecurity executive, also adjunct faculty over at University of Dallas. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Yeah, we're hoping that the power stays on here as well. It's been a wild ride for the month of May. I think we've got like 11 and a half inches of rain here at the house. So a little crazy month.
I've run my sprinkler like 2 times so far this year, just not had to run it at all, which is nice for the water bill. But, I'd much rather.
You don't have water or utility bills at this point. So,
Yeah. 4 days without power will keep your electricity bill down. Nice. Well, thanks for joining us. We're going to talk all about Mr. Williams here in a little bit, but first we're going to do our normal and talk about HOU.SEC.CON and then get into the article and all the normal things. So, Sam, what's the deal with HOU.SEC.CON, man? How was it?
Dear man, that was so great. I mean, it really exceeded our expectations. And we're working on next year already. So we're looking for a new venue because we're going to go bigger. It just clearly there was a need for this, and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. So really excited about that. We did record those videos. Those videos are now up on YouTube. So go check out the YouTube channel and see what we had at HOU.SEC.CON, and hope to see many of them return and more people join us next year.
Yep. Yeah, we should have a formal CFP and all the stuff for HOU.SEC.CON next year. So really excited about that. So we just had, this is on this Friday recording. Last night we had our, I think it's our 3rd or 4th now, HOU.SEC.CON user group. That was extremely well attended. We had 50 plus people there, I think, yesterday. That was really good. I'm really excited about how those are going. Thank you, everybody, for attending those. Please keep coming to those. That's a free event. Good sponsors, good talks. We had John Kinderbog come out and talk last night. We got Paula DeWitt, another adjunct faculty of law out at Texas A&M, and also professor of practice of computer science and engineering at A&M. So I'm very excited to have her. She lives here in Houston, but she is up at A&M as a professor. So she's going to be coming in on June 27th. So get signed up for that ASAP. Again, good location, good food, good talks, good discussion, everything. And you have a happy hour at the end. I mean, it's just kind of all rolled up into one cool ball. Have a lot of fun. So please come out for that.
And I think one of the unique things there too, just to add on to it, is, I mean, part of that format is the open discussion. And, a lot of you go to these groups and they don't have that open discussion, but this is really good format where people can all engage in a conversation. So it really makes it a lot more interesting, and getting better understanding of other folks, where their heads are at with these different topics. So well done.
Yeah, it's when you sign up for it, just so you know, if you sign up, you get a chance to submit a topic for discussion. And the topics are so good every time. It's like the hardest part of running the group is trying to figure out which topics we discuss, because we get like 8 or 9 really good topics and we can only do about 3 in the time frame that we have. Otherwise, we'll be there till 11 o'clock. And generally, we end up having to kick people out of there after happy hour anyway, so it may not be a big deal. But yeah, it's really good discussion. We had a really good time last night. We talked a lot about building careers and stuff like that, so that was good. So HOU.SEC.CON is coming up July 18th. We've got the full speaker list is out. Please go apply if you think you are, you're cybersecurity executive, cybersecurity director, manager, any of that kind of level. Please sign up for it, apply for it, and we'll get you approved so you can get your ticket. For those who have been approved and you received your email and you have not taken the second step to buy your ticket, please go do that. We want to make sure we've got everybody in there that wants to get in there. And that is just over a month away. It's going to be at the Hotel Zaza down in the
Museum District.
Museum District. There we go. Thank you. So really cool area, really cool venue. So Hotel Zaza is kind of swanky. So go get your ticket for that. What else, Sam? We got one last thing to talk about here.
Yeah. So obviously for the main conference in September, tickets are on sale. Don't wait. While we have a lot more room at this new conference venue, we always seem to end up selling out. And and for planning purposes, we really need to make sure we know that we have enough room for everybody. So go get your tickets. Don't wait. They're inexpensive. You think about a conference this large and this much content and great content. This is dirt cheap for compared to everywhere else. The sponsorships we have, most of them sold out. There's only there's well over half that are sold out on our sponsorships there. So if you are interested in sponsoring, get with our sponsor wrangler right away. You can get to him through our page or ping either Michael or myself. Happy to direct you to him and get your spot locked down, because we will sell out of sponsorships. We always do. And they're an important part of what we do. So we love to see that and appreciate the support. And lastly, as of today, as we're recording, this is the last day that we're doing. So by the time this airs next week, the CFP will be closed. We had a great amount of submittals again. Of course, a lot of them coming in the last several days right before the closing. So love the procrastination, everybody. Thank you very much. But a lot of good content already. So we're going to have an amazing we still haven't selected. We got to go through that selection process. We're not going to be able to obviously accept all of them, but looking forward to getting through all that and announcing hopefully the agenda before the end of June.
Yep. I'm excited about that. Yeah. We were at the user group and Sam's like, I think like 9 more just came in. So it was kind of crazy. And people are at the user group asking me like, what's the last minute? I can just like, please just submit something. So awesome. All right. Well, that's all things HOU.SEC.CON. Thanks everybody for bearing with us on that. And we really hope to see you at all these events. And now we've got an article. So Branden, you submitted an article about Apple Wi-Fi positioning systems. And so why don't you let us know kind of why that struck your fancy, what you think is important about that, and we'll get into it.
Sure, yeah. So this is an article from Eric Rye and Dave Levin, and it's called Surveilling the Masses with Wi-Fi-Based Positioning Systems. And it's an academic article. But what's interesting to me is, so back in the day, we say back in the day, like, mid-2000s, when we started to get smartphones that had some sort of geolocation function on them, there wasn't a GPS chip sitting in there talking to satellites. In most cases, right? So most cases, they were using something called Wi-Fi-based positioning system. And it's really understanding that anywhere you go, you probably have maybe a dozen, if not more, Wi-Fi access points that are in the vicinity and visible to that device. And so using the geocoordinates of where those specific devices are, those base stations, that's how it geolocates where you are if it's using that system. And so there is this massive catalog that has all these access points listed in there with their location. And so based on queries, these guys made a map of like all the cataloged everything. So basically removed it from the existing database, created their own database. And then they're able to find people if they needed to, or find devices wherever they are. So the point being that it's just kind of an interesting way to take advantage of an API that exists with a pretty heavy or pretty light limits, I should say, on the amount of queries. The Google API that they mentioned, they were doing the work, and the API for Google had 3x more capability to query than what they were actually doing. So the capacity was huge. But the reality is that it goes down to, if you're a targeted individual, then you got to be smart about your OPSEC. And it probably doesn't apply to most people for the most part, but they do actually have some recommendations at the bottom. And it's the same sort of recommendations that we talk about, which is, from a user perspective, if you are going to be using Wi-Fi, maybe use different Wi-Fi access points if you're in the same spot. Or just don't use them at all. That just creates different sorts of OPSEC problems, right? And then if you're a manufacturer, what they're actually recommending is implementing what Google and Apple have already implemented on the phones, which is that privacy randomization of the MAC address. And so by doing that on the base station side, then you're now going to create this sort of confusion in the database to where this stuff isn't necessarily as possible. So I just thought it was a really interesting way to sort of take an existing API that has a particular use and find a new use for it. I think it's a lot of what security people do, and what gets us excited anyway is that we see kind of like Gene Kranz in Apollo 13, his character saying, I don't care what it is designed to do. I want to know what it can do. Like, what can we get this thing to do and make it do things that may be unexpected or creative in other ways?
The mind of a hacker, right?
That's right.
That's what it's trying to do, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we talked a little bit about this before the recording, but and you bring it up. This isn't something that affects everybody for the most part, right? But if you are targeted, and when I was thinking through this, I'm like, okay, well, there's the obvious targets, and those are the well-known people, maybe celebrities or political folks, things like politicians, things like that. But then there's things that I start thinking about. Well, wait a minute. If you have a concern about stalking, right? If you're being stalked, right? This is something that you probably want to go and take a look at the article and see what things you can do to protect yourself. And hopefully you're not spending your time checking in on all the social media and every location and coffee shop you visit. But I know that's a concern for some folks, right? And so for regular person like me that may have concerns about somebody doing something bad or in a bad position, then good to know. It's good to know this stuff, and it's good that we're looking at it. But to your point, for the most part, most folks are probably not going to have too much of a concern on any of it.
Yeah. In fact, they do talk about both war regions going on right now are listed as, how they were applying this in both Gaza and in Ukraine. There's another side as well, and you can think about journalists who put themselves at risk, and they have to have very good OPSEC, because they could be targeted by, a nation state or somebody who just doesn't like what they have to say.
Yeah, and what from a technical perspective, I thought it was neat that they were at least trying. They don't think it's going to happen, but trying to get the BSSID randomization in the standard itself. So that just becomes because if you do that, then you drastically reduce it for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. And then you just don't have to worry about it as much. And then journalists can feel like, hey, I'm not having to take a bunch of special, they're still going to have to take special considerations, but maybe that's just one thing off their plate that they don't have to worry about anymore. But I doubt most of the manufacturers are like, I don't see a reason to do that. Right. And it's just one more thing they've got to add and take away their profit margin a little bit and everything else. So.
It's one more feature that trumped any sort of security, right? Let's get it out before we think about the repercussions. Right? And it's just very typical of any company offering this to the mass market.
I remember when the Wi-Fi standard was getting worked on and just all of the different things. That was in the 2000s, early 2000s, when that was popping up, and just all of the different things we had to worry about. And we had a customer that was using them in their point of sale systems early on before everything had got, there wasn't even put on them yet. And it was like just completely free and open, and you could do all this stuff. It's gotten drastically better since then, but this is one other step that would actually be nice to have in the standard at some point. But
yeah, also, well, if you look at like the long tail of some of these things, we've talked about some of the named vulnerabilities in embedded systems and how long they're going to last. This would be an example of that. Like, there's so many Wi-Fi access points that are horrifically out of date, old hardware, not supported. It's like, well, I can still get online, so I'm going to use it.
Just whatever. Then that's when you start putting protections on the endpoint, trying to cover it, because that's not going to get covered on any kind of old hardware. A lot of technical debt out there, and nobody wants to get rid of it. So, all right. Well, thank you, Branden, for that article. Appreciate it. Interesting stuff. We are going to take a quick break. And on the other side of that break, we will talk about Branden, everything he's doing these days, and talk about his talk at HOU.SEC.CON, and we'll finish up after that. So we'll see you on the other side of the break. All right. Hope you enjoyed the break. We are back with Branden. So, Branden, I've known you for a long time. I think Sam's known you for a while as well. We go back to all the RSA days and all of that stuff, the blogger meetups and all those good times. So I've known you for a while, but I don't actually know like all your background. I know you got a lot of compliance stuff that you've done. And I think identity access management stuff, all of that. You got a pretty varied background, but really like for you to talk to us and talk to our audience about kind of what got you into cybersecurity and the security in general. A lot of people, as we've talked about, Sam has talked about, want to hear those stories so they can figure out their own paths, even getting in or just in the future. So give us a rundown, sir.
Sure. Yeah. So my origin story starts in the mid 90s, and I was a super technical guy. Like I was a Linux guy. I was running Slackware 128 back in the day, really sort of learning how all of these things worked on the internet. And to me, what was fascinating is being able to work and control a system that I wasn't looking at. I could use the internet or a modem in the days to go control some system that was far away from me. And that was really fascinating. So I got into like learning how web servers worked and learning how DNS and infrastructure and like all that stuff worked. And I had a startup with a partner that we did in 1996. And we were a web hosting company. So like this, you got to think about, put yourself in the time. This is when Amazon just sold books, right? Like you really couldn't do all the things you can do, but there were companies that were trying to understand, like, I need a marketing site on the web. Like we did have one of our favorite clients was a voiceover guy. And so his website, which we designed, had a ton of voiceover like clips and things on it. So it was pretty early on for something like that, 96, 97. Built like all the infrastructure behind the scenes. I'm even published in like an early version of Linux Journal with my user manager software. It was like this series of, I think, TC shell scripts that like had all of the ability to manage this stuff at scale for all of our customers, adding, removing email, all that kind of stuff, right? And I was doing all of this for the ISPs as well. So learning how BGP worked and then doing development and writing applications, just being like a super techie guy. Well, in 1997, we noticed some weird activity on one of our machines, and somebody had compromised an IMAP server that we weren't actually using, of course, because didn't think about it, right? And he had put in some backdoors, which we found. But what he was really doing is he just wanted to be able to register domains and use our DNS infrastructure to point to the IPs for those domains. So he'd registered a bunch of domains. And this is back in the day where you used to do it by sending a properly formatted text-based email. There was no money associated with it. You just sent it, it got registered. So that's what fascinated me, because I was like, okay, again, like this was something that was used. It was a published vulnerability. It was my fault, 100% my fault. We had no data loss, no downtime, nothing like that. But I was fascinated on how that all happened. So that's what really got me into security. It's back in those days, like it was IT people who sort of secured systems. There wasn't really like this separate function as much, at least in the private sector. So we did that for a while, and I, built some different technology. Some of it's sitting out. You can look at my GitHub and you can see some of it out there. Then I got into consulting, and that's really where I think a lot of people know where my origin, as far as like where they might recognize my name or see some of my work. So I was pretty big into the payment space, doing a lot of PCI stuff, worked with cleaning up some very large breaches, the ones that we all know from like the late 2000s. We were always too expensive before the breach happened, but afterwards they're like, yes, we need you to come in and help us clean this up. So they were some pretty significant, very newsworthy deals. But after that, like I started to move, like I spent like the first half of that part of my career, convincing people that they should secure their systems and do PCI. And then I spent the last half convincing them that they don't need to do that. Like there's better ways to, reduce the risk and reduce cost and things like that. And especially with the new version of the standard, which we've just released a book on that, like it's pretty extensive. And it's what's interesting is watching the posts on LinkedIn from people doing his assessments saying, y'all got to be patient with us. This is way more work than anything we've ever had to do before. And so it's going to cause the cost to go up, and it's going to cause the time to go up, and remediation and all of that other type of stuff. So, but after I did that, I kind of went into I went to work for RSA, and I was one of the field CTO before they really had them at the time.
Mm.
And then I did a couple of startups, did First Data, did a startup in Ireland. But when I went to work for Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group as a bank, that's when it really started to pick up as far as much more hardcore security type work. I ended up inheriting our customer identity function. So anytime somebody logged in to send a $3 million wire transfer or to pay a $10 bill, that was my stuff that was sitting in front. And we did a complete rip and replace. So it was kind of aging old technology that needed to be fixed and modernized. But I learned a lot. And so all the things that we had to do defending the bank against bad actors is really what sort of inspired the talk that I did at HOU.SEC.CON last year. And it's part of this thing that we all have to deal with. And it was this level of how much acceptance do I want for these types of activities versus what I want to block. And then if I block something, do I have to deal with somebody pivoting and then coming up with a new creative way that takes me a minute to figure out how they're getting in there to take advantage of these systems. So I would say that, today, in my role today, so I'm currently looking, by the way, so I'm looking for my next engagement. We just started class 2 days ago. So I am teaching again, pen testing class, and then the capstone class for the degree, the master's degree. But I'm, if there's somebody's looking for a CISO, deputy CISO, or a head of identity, somebody who can really sort of push the needle as far as transformation and running that identity, especially on the customer side, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm your guy. So I did spend some time at Ping Identity. It was really great. I really enjoyed my time there. And then, I think just a couple of things. The way that when people ask me today, because I'm a professor, so they ask me how do I get into this? What do I need to do? And everybody's story is unique. And I think that was kind of the point of doing this, to get so many different people to tell their story, because no two stories are alike. Yeah. But when I give advice, it's usually get as technical as you can. I think as we move along through this timeline, we continue to get farther and farther away from understanding how the things underneath work. We've got so much abstraction. We've got so much other stuff. And I'll give you a prime example. This was at the bank. We had a situation where there was this one router or switch deep inside of the AT&T network that would burp every so often. And we knew exactly which one it was. We couldn't find anybody at AT&T who would talk to us, but it would cause problems for us. So it would cause a latency issue, and we would have to shut down some of our infrastructure. So the guys were, internally talking about how do we, move around this? And they're like, oh, let's just create some static routes. And I'm like, hold on, guys. This is BGP. A static routes is you're going to create asymmetrical routes. You're just going to have routing out one way, but it's still going to come back the other way. If you're going to do this, you need to do BGP communities. You need to do things like that. And they're like, oh, we really don't know how to, do any of that stuff. And I'm like, guys, BGP is old tech. BGP 4 is 30 years old. It's not changed dramatically. We should know how to do this. But because there was so much scrutiny, they were afraid to do that, well, we're just going to wait it out and just try to call everybody we know at AT&T and see if they can help us turn off the switch or upgrade it or whatever. But just the fact that, they were really good at understanding how to do static routes internally, but not understanding the bigger picture, not understanding, the lab side. And I'm not saying everybody needs to do that, by the way. But, you should have a lab in your house or in a cloud scenario. It's pretty cheap to do. And it allows you to play and learn. In fact, our pen testing class, one of my favorite things about the pen testing class is that we have labs provided to us by a company that's literally you start the lab and it fires up, 2 to 3 to 10 virtual machines. And you have to do the attacking, compromising, all the things, and you create that record and memory in your brain in a safe way. So yeah, that's how I came to be where I am. And I appreciate you guys letting me tell that story.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the exact discussion we had at the user group last night. It was putting labs in. I told the story of, because somebody was asking, should they build a lab in their hub, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, look, when I hire somebody that's technical, I don't ask, do you have a lab? I say, what is in your lab? How is it built? And if they hem haul, then I'm like, okay, you probably should have a lab. Why am I otherwise you're going to have to prove to me that you've got some skills. And it's not a knock on people. If you're, to your point, if you're not a deeply technical person, there are other avenues to work in this field. But BGP has been around a long time. I mean, to not understand how, now, to be fair, it also gets mentioned a lot in news articles that a lot of people don't know about, and it scares the bejesus out of everybody because they're like, oh, somebody messed up BGP route and now the whole internet just went down, So I get it can scare people, but still you should probably know about that these modern days if you're going to be working in a network. So
I think from a lab perspective, the thing that I love about having one is that if I want to try something, like it just takes a few minutes to spin something up, with automation tools, whether it's Ansible or anything else. Like I want to spin a couple of VMs to try something, or, with Docker, I want to like get a container going and see how this thing works. Like just understanding some of those things and be able to try stuff out, I think is so important to be able to then think about, okay, how would I handle this if my boss came in and said the business asked for this functionality? How do I do it safely and securely? And if I can't, speak from some perspective, I've tried that. Like I kind of know some of the quirks, but we can do this together and learn together. But I've at least seen this technology and understand sort of the basics of how it works. That's the part I think is really important.
100%. Sam, any thoughts on that story?
No, I you kind of alluded to it. So, I mean, the technical aspect, some folks aren't as technical, and depending on what role you're looking to go after or whatever. I mean, obviously technical foundation is a great foundation to have. I will say I've got a technical foundation myself in somewhat of a different field, but it gives me the context of understanding how to take things apart. That being said, there are plenty of other roles in cyber that don't necessarily require a deep technical understanding of that. And I also keep thinking about, stories I've heard. Like I have some good friends that are auto mechanics, back from my youth, and the last thing they wanted to do when they got home was put their hands in their own cars, right? It's like, oh my God, do it all day long, right? And I get it, right? So it's not easy for everybody, but I think the real context here is, that's Branden's path, and that's a good path, and somebody else might find that exact same path. Although I don't know how much web hosting is really a thing as much these days with Wix and everybody else around. But it's good to have that context, right? There's going to be different paths for everybody. And I think that's really what's important about these discussions.
And we're not going to need any of this technical background after AI takes over anyway. We're just going to say, build me a network, and it's going to do what we need. So it's all.
Here comes the bots, right? And that's our next topic.
That's our next topic. Hey, the bots. So that was the best segue I've ever heard, Sam.
I work hard at it, man. I work hard.
All right. So, Branden, thank you again for telling the story. Really appreciate it. Give some people some context on where you've come from, and again, help them with their own paths. But we want to talk about your talk at HOU.SEC.CON 2023. And I think you submitted another talk for 2024. So hopefully we can get you back again. But in 2023, you talked about bots. You talked about the use of bots. You had a really cool character that was AI generated too, which I thought was really neat. But you talked about, friendly bots, bad bots. And to your point, you also talked kind of about the use of them, and if they're being used, how do you get the bad ones out without affecting the behavior of your site so it doesn't affect your legitimate customers, so on and so forth. So I'll stop and let you talk about what your talk was about. I'll quit talking about it. So give us a rundown of what you went over, and then we'll discuss.
Yeah. So this was, again, inspired by my work at the bank. And really what sort of inspired it was we had a massive credential stuffing attack that overwhelmed the basic sort of controls we had in place. And so I had to get a technology, which I probably hold the record at the bank. I think I got it from like discovering we needed a problem to in production in 3 weeks, which normally it's like a year to negotiate an MSA at the bank. So like 3 weeks to get this done. And it's only because we had 1.5 million, unique IPs hitting us, just creating this massive cred stuffing attack. And even internally, it was kind of like, hey, congrats, guys. We're now big enough that people care and they want to try to attack this stuff. So now let's get serious, because we've been saying this is a risk for the last 10 years. But, now that you can see it's a risk, let's handle it. So it was starting with that, and then thinking about how, there are then legitimate sites. So that was an illegitimate one. That was somebody trying to validate usernames and passwords to get access to financial accounts. But there's also legitimate ones in the case of, like, for example, maybe you use a tool, and I'm not going to mention any names, but use a tool to help track your subscriptions, right? And so what you do with those tools is you connect them to your bank account, sometimes through an intermediary, like Plaid's a pretty big one that people see a lot. And what that is, that's still a bot that's making this connection between that service that you're using to track those, the fintech service can track your subscriptions, and your banking register that has all those transactions, or credit card register, right? So there is value add, but it's very symbiotic relationship. And that's how it's viewed in the banking side, is that banking side is inertia is a super powerful tool, and it just kind of sits there. They don't really want to create innovative financial products for the most part, because there's this fintech industry that can do it for them. And fintech is not regulated, whereas financial services is regulated. So there are like some advantages to having it like that. But when you're sitting on the defender side, you have to make the determination of what's good and what's bad, because you may be in a situation where, if, for example, you decide I'm going to block all bot traffic, that means that you cannot connect any of those things. And actually, I'll mention one because it's turned off now, Mint, right? I can't connect Mint into my account. So I'm going to go find another bank. And that's a pretty difficult, like, people don't typically change their bank. You have to do some sort of financial harm or really make them upset, because it's a hassle to move your banking relationships around. So people are willing to put up with a lot. But if somebody's to the point where, like, no, I need help managing my finances, I need help budgeting, and you're not providing those tools, so I have to go external. And if you're not going to help me do that, I might switch. So these are kind of those conversations that have to happen. So in the talk, we talked about, what are those types of tools, the good and the bad tools? And then, talking about what our character Dottie the defender, what Dottie needed to know when she was making her recommendations and doing her, sort of mitigations on what was going on. So then the other part is we actually created a couple of bots just to demonstrate that, hey, all of us here, could probably find some use in this. So as an example, if there was a particular, like, here, I'll give you a prime example. There was a beer festival that we used to volunteer for here in the Metroplex. And basically, if you volunteered, then you got access and like a free tasting card. And we always bought more because it was a charity, but it's like, you work for 3-4 hours and then you get to hang out and have a couple beers and then, Uber home, right? Well, the prime thing to get was the VIP tent, because a lot of times it was air conditioned inside. They had better beer, and they would like, here, you should try this, because you're going to be talking to the VIPs that come in. You should be able to tell them what it tastes like, right? So you get access to pretty rare stuff. Well, I wanted to know the second that they posted the sign-up sheet, so that I could then go sign up real fast. I never did the signing up from a bot perspective. I think there's probably an ethical consideration there, but I got the alert right away when it changed and said, okay, and I'm going to go sign up, right? So there are some positive ways. Or like another one could be, I want to know when my vendor releases new software. Sometimes you get an email, sometimes you don't. Sometimes they like point it, like if you're running Ruby on Rails, if you're running Rails and you want to see, you got to monitor the Rails website for when they post new versions of Rails to do your upgrades. So that was kind of the whole thing we went through, right? We really tried to understand and delineate what's good, what's bad. And then the last part is having a conversation with management, because ultimately, it is not a security person's decision on what is good and what is bad. It's a security person's role to explain that to the business, and then have the business say, we are okay with accepting this risk, or we are not okay with accepting this risk. So as an example, there are companies that sell tickets to events that have no problem with bots scooping up all those tickets and then creating a secondary market, because it makes them more money. They get to participate on both sides of the transaction. We can have conversations on the nature of that. Yeah. But that's an example of where that particular industry said, we don't care. Another good example would be when everybody was trying to get a PS5 and we had these bots buying the PS5. So if I'm a retailer, do I care? I don't know, man. I just cleared out my inventory in 30 seconds and sold, a pallet of PS5s. I've got a chunk of cash. Why do I care? Right. Whereas there were some retailers that were making active efforts to say, no, I want actual people to get these PS5s. So I'm going to put a CAPTCHA, or I'm going to put some other human detection stuff in there to try to make sure it's a person that's getting access to this and it's not creating the secondary market. So it's really sort of like, was kind of like, let's explain it. Let's, talk about what the risks are, and then let's go forward and make a decision and sort of implement. And for any of the talks that I do, like, one of the things that I like to do is create resource packs. So there's, if you can find it on my website, or now you reach out to me and all, or we can put a link somewhere on it. But I've got all of the materials, the source code of the stuff that we created, as well as like just a resource sort of walkthrough. Like, these are the things to consider. If you want future reading, go look at these things. You always think that the talks that we give at conferences are designed to like highlight a subject, but you can never cover everything completely. So you want to let people wanting a little bit more. And for those people, I want to like give them a little bit of a guide. Like, I'm not just going to set you loose. Here's, 5 things to look at. And from there, I know you're going to figure out what the next 10 or 12 are. So that was a talk. It was really fun. I really enjoyed doing it. I really enjoyed creating the character and sort of walking through the story, using storytelling to sort of explain how this is a real thing that we all should pay attention to. And it was a lot of fun.
The storytelling was very effective. I loved Dottie in different like positions of like, what's going on? There was one that I saw, she just looked like completely frazzled. I was like, poor Dottie. She's just going through hell, man.
Yeah.
I have a question for Michael based on that content, and it's when do we get which of the volunteers is creating a bot for the volunteer sign up list for HOU.SEC.CON?
I would imagine there's a couple of them.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
that's a good one. But the ticket thing was the first thing that came to mind when I was watching that. I'm like, because I love live music, I hate paying the exorbitant fees and all that stuff, and I've got a day job. I can't sit here and monitor when next time that my favorite band comes to town, right? And so I'm like, yeah, man, that's definitely bad. But at the same time, one of the things that got me thinking was, you're talking about bots, and I'm like, okay, well, in the age of AI, is a bot an AI? Right. And at what point does it jump over? And if bots are getting to be more human-like, is that an AI thing? And at what point can we trust? Because there's a point there. During your presentation, you were talking about times where you could tell if that bot was doing good or bad. Well, if I get to a point where there's a lot more of a human-like element to it, like AI should be doing for us, how do you tell at that? What point can you differentiate at that? When we get to that stage, right?
It's really tough. The reason why the credential stuffing attack was so devastating for us at the bank is they were using a headless Chrome browser, right? So it's very different when you're on the server side and you load up some JavaScript and things like that. Like, one of the examples we talked about is it's pretty easy to tell if a rudimentary bot is interacting with you because it won't execute the JavaScript. So if you're expecting telemetry to come back and it doesn't come back, you're dealing with somebody who's disabled JavaScript or a bot. I don't know how you can function on the internet disabling JavaScript. And like, everything you work with has some level of that client-side UI enhancement that's working in a browser or in an app. So you kind of have to have it, even though nobody really loves it, I guess would be the word, but you kind of have to have it. So, that headless Chrome thing will execute all that stuff. And, if you are building your AI engine to send signals that look more like a human moving a mouse around, for example, then it becomes pretty challenging for those companies to detect if this is good or bad. And so, it does come down to like even creating like the most advanced AI, headless Chrome, headless Firefox bot may not be practical when you're thinking about bad behavior on a large scale, just because of the overhead and things you have to do with it. It's much easier to do what an attacker did to us at the bank, which was find an API that was actually not you couldn't use it in the app, but it was still live because nobody turned it off, and run a credential stuffing attack against that. Like, it's way easier to do those types of things than to try to, load up a phone in a virtual sort of perspective, whatever you do, like the one virtual phones that you load up and you load the app and you try to like dissect and work with all the traffic there. I mean, you can do that. It's just at scale, it's not as easy. And in fact, when we did roll out the technology we rolled out, we were monitoring on one of the places, like an intelligence forum was giving us details because we were learning from the attacker who was posting things about this attack was going on. And they finally said, okay, we give up. Like, I'm done with these guys. They've got a better countermeasure, and I'm not interested. I'm going to find another bank to go after that doesn't have this stuff.
That's what it's about, making it too difficult for them to, doesn't make it economic, everything. I remember way back, and again, when the security first started popping up as a field, this was like, I guess CISSP was around. It was like 2002, something like that. I just got my CISSP and I got laid off. It was right after 9/11 and everything else. And I found this, I didn't have a whole lot of money, was young, was looking for a job, was contracting, had 2 young kids, and was like, I can't pay for like an Exchange server or something. And it was hard to get it hosted and all that. So I found this free email server that I used. I just had it home, had it hosted, and I sat there and watched the logs and just watched the frustration because they were throwing all these scripts at it, thinking it was like an Exchange server or something, trying to find directories and all this. And I was just like, and it was all script kiddie stuff. And then you could see them get frustrated because all of a sudden they brought in somebody to do some real, I mean, you could tell it was a human going at it. He couldn't find any directories or anything that was open, and they finally quit. And I was like, sometimes security by obscurity works because they have no idea what this email server is. But I'm sure if you had it today, it'd be full of holes, but they didn't, they couldn't find it then. So sometimes it works. Well,
one last thing I wanted to mention here is one of the other points I took away from Branden's talk was the comment on treatment, and that was the YOLO, go home and drink whiskey, which is I think the point that we're at right now with today's podcast. But yeah, that was good too.
Yeah, I mean that was sort of that comment around like the PlayStations, right? It's like, whatever. I made my money. I don't care where it happens soon after that. I have no connection, whatever. That's definitely YOLO, go home, drink whiskey. So.
I just waited. I was just patient and waited like 2 years to get my PS5 because I was like, I'm not going out and trying to find one of these jokers that cost, $1,000 or, $1,200, $1,500 or whatever. I don't need it that bad. I can play God of War some other time. So, all right, sir. Well, and forgive me, I forgot to tell everybody, it's Dr. Branden Williams, by the way. He's even got the shirt on this time. But apologies. It has not been that long ago that you got your doctorate, though, right?
It's been 10 years now. Time flies.
Oh, wait a minute. I didn't think it was that long ago. Well, never mind. So
yeah, because so when
double doctor a long time, Branden Williams.
When you go through the program, when you build your dissertation, all your data that sits on it, there's like a 7-year limit. So you put everything on there. You have to have it on a CD archive for 7 years, and then you destroy it after that. So that was 3 years ago. I was like, oh man, it was like during COVID. I pulled it out. I'm like, just go ahead and shred that CD. Don't really need that anymore. But yeah, time flies.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we've got a friend of the conference that just got his doctorate, so we're really excited about him. So yeah, thanks, Dr. Branden Williams, for being on here. I knew you before you were a doctor, so I'll keep calling you Branden.
Absolutely.
But we really appreciate you jumping on. Thanks for coming out to HOU.SEC.CON, and hopefully we can get you back again this year. You're just right up the road in Texas standards, so glad to have you down again. So
yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yep, absolutely. Sam, any parting thoughts?
No, somebody go hire Dr. Williams.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm here for it. You call me Branden. You don't have to call me doctor. So, bring it on.
You get a doctor for the price of somebody that doesn't want to be called a doctor.
Right.
So
all right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining. This was episode 20. We got more coming soon. We got more speakers to talk to, and we'll keep putting out good content if you keep watching and listening. So, all right. See everybody on the next one. Thanks, Branden, again.
See y'all.